do you follow any of the politicians on Twitter? Are you on Twitter yourself?
I am, and in fact, I just started following the Pope on Twitter. He's a whole different kind of politician, but yes, I do. That's not the principal way. I mean, I'm sort of a terrible Twitter follower. I'm not often on Twitter, and I find when I'm on there that I do get sort of breaking news. Like really interesting things are coming out on Twitter long before they come out in other news sources. So I'm kind of ashamed, but there's just too much to do. I mean, it's true that social media is incredibly time consuming. It is beyond me how people are signed on to Facebook and Twitter at the same time and accomplish anything else in their day. So, like it is I mean, I think that isn't that a part of the conversation? There's a sort of Luddite conversation always happening in the background about maybe social media is at its core bad because it's removing our ability to relate to each other and build meaningful relationships and engage with the world around us. So that, it sort of feeds into that narrative that the person is glued to their laptop with one screen showing Twitter and the other screen showing Facebook, and there are those people. But I don't keep up. I don't receive all of the value that I could, I think, from following that. What I end up getting is I watch the news in the evening. They tell me about the interesting like clips, that are on the internet that are creating the big stir, and then I go on Twitter, search for it, find it, and then catch up on what everybody already knew. And yet that is still a completely. I mean, it's unheard of. Before this time, before these recent, this past decade, it is unheard of that I would be able or you would be able to watch the news, hear that a politician, has a 30-minute video where they say all of these troubling things, and we actually have access to this 30-minute video because the news can't show it all, and we get to make decisions based on that, and we get to share that with other people to try to persuade them on either side of our position. It's a really fascinating and exciting kind of possibility.
Yeah, and that's the really interesting thing about this, in that how many people actually go to the internet and find that unedited clip of footage or not so heavily edited clip of footage is a really interesting question about the democratizing potential of digital media. And what you were saying, I really love how you're balancing the pros and cons. In this unit, we're trying to balance the potential benefits and the potential risks and dangers and limitations and downsides of digital media. And you're right, I mean, just through all this digital media, it's also opening it up beyond, even within American politics, it's opening it up beyond internally in America, because I've noticed when a number of my students have been following me on Twitter, that they're being followed by Barack Obama. So, I know so many students, and to some degree, especially at the time myself, I felt like I was so invested in the US election, even though in some objective sense that's kind of absurd in a lot of ways. But nonetheless, and that's part of the celebrity as well. I will admit to that.
Does it? I'm asking a question. I'm asking you a question. Is there the sense now? There is certainly the sense in American politics, and it's true to varying degrees at different levels of government, but there is this sense, the conversation that in order to be a viable candidate and a sexy candidate, one that people are fighting to vote for, you must have a robust social media identity and strategy. Is there the same sense of that in Australia?
Yes. For example, I believe when Kevin Rudd was quite a heavy Twitter user, and he, in terms of Australia, he would be, I think, the very first Prime Minister to really get involved personally and use it. And that brings in that authenticity issue as to whether or not he's actually writing his tweets. And there was certainly, when Julia Gillard became Prime Minister, she didn't have a Twitter account, and there seemed to be enough talk about that she actually suddenly did have a Twitter account, although she signed her tweets with JG or when she actually wrote the tweet, so it wasn't always her, which is probably understandable. But yeah, so that kind of thing happens. But I think even though, especially our conservative politicians and certainly people who I dare say have never been on social media before, the key figures who people know their face and name, they've all got a Twitter account, and I'm following the main ones. And they're fairly frequent users, but I dare say most of them are not actually writing their tweets. and it's it's usually pretty standard stuff.
There's the total expectation here that none of them are writing their tweets, answering their own emails. I mean, there really is no sense that there is any authenticity in response. But it's still exciting. It's fascinating now. There's still, I mean, even with technology, what it is, and the expectation that we can communicate with these people, we can engage with them immediately online. When there's something that's really high stakes here, a really high stakes vote happening, and we're concerned that the vote is close and we want to make sure that our local politician is going to go and vote the right way, everybody places a phone call, and that creates, I mean, it's fascinating that that still tips the scale, and it's something that I think people whose politics are so deeply entrenched in social media and online engagement being the sole method of influencing people are missing out on the fact that there is still a way in which, what we would imagine as good old-fashioned, grassroots influencing of politicians, that still counts. And it probably counts a lot because so many of the people who care enough to make those phone calls are constituents who have consistently voted for you and who you really want to keep happy, and are maybe people that are less inclined to engage with you online anyway. But, if you are politically savvy enough to know that that is a really important way to influence the conversation, it counts. So I do think as we grow increasingly informed about the versatile ways in which social media can be brought into political engagement, if we're working on a politician's campaign or trying to be politicians ourselves, yikes. We need to figure out how to make best use of social media, and that'll happen over time. And as we, especially the majority of us, are figuring out what their strategy is, so we understand how to consume things in an informed way, and how we can use social media to do the kind of grassroots work that I was doing when I was knocking on doors and placing phone calls. All of that we still have to remember can and should be synthesized with what we imagine to be traditional forms of activism. So the phone call still matters, and it maybe matters less, but when I tell my students when I'm teaching them, for whatever reason, that they need to contact somebody in some influence and authority, and they say, can I send the email? Of course you can send the email, but so few people call that if you're not getting a response by email, you will shock a person by calling them and get a much faster response than if you just email them and you're already in a long list. So when phone calls are so rare and coming, it's incredible what you can accomplish when you place a call. And that has to be something that when we are thinking about how, not just that social media makes our ability to participate civically easier, because it does in a certain kind of way. Like, okay, well, I consider myself a political person. I signed on to Obama's, his list of supporters, and I get his emails, and I'm also on his Facebook page sometimes. Okay, that's a value, that's doing something. But we do still have to preserve and remember and be strategic ourselves about how we can, protect our own values and try to advance them in ways that are still offline. And that isn't coming from a place that's like, I necessarily think it should or shouldn't be that way. But it is a matter of fact that doing things that leveraging that rare kind of offline activism does more now than it used to, because it is so unusual. So if we want to be most effective, it's worth considering the way that we balance these things.
So that's about. They're not actually being sort of graded until we see the finalised project. It's okay, Tiff. And the other thing that you really Tiffany, it's all right. Good girl. Okay. Yep. And I strongly encourage you to move forward with that process at the rate that the group has Tiff, good girl. Yeah, you scared him away. Good girl. Right.